Welcome to Veiled Narratives, where emotions are draped in elegance and stories breathe love, pain, and redemption. The night the contract was signed, the sky above New York wept as if the heavens themselves mourned for her. Alina stood in a gown she never chose, in a marriage she never wanted. The sound of rain tapping against the tall glass walls of the courthouse echoed the rhythm of her trembling heart. She wasn't marrying for love. She was marrying to save her father's dream, the company that had been his life's work. Across the long mahogany table sat Aiden Knight, a man whose name carried both reverence and fear. Billionaire CEO, the face of the Knight Empire, known for building empires and breaking people. His black suit was flawless, his expression unreadable. The only warmth in him came from the soft flicker of the penlight reflecting in his eyes as he signed the marriage contract. He looked up once, his gaze meeting hers, cold, measured, calculated. "This isn't love, Miss Alina," he said in a voice smooth as silk and sharp as glass. "It's business. You'll learn to play your part." Her fingers tightened around the bouquet she no longer wanted to hold. "And what part is that, Mr. Knight?" she asked quietly. "The one I give you." Those words sealed more than a deal, they sealed her fate. When the ink dried, she became Mrs. Alina Knight. The world saw her as a woman who had captured the city's most powerful man. But behind the glamour of magazine headlines and camera flashes was a truth colder than marble floors. She was the collateral in a corporate alliance, the pawn in a billionaire's game. That night, the mansion loomed before her like a silent fortress, vast, elegant, and lonely. Every chandelier sparkled like frozen tears. Servants greeted her with polite bows, but she felt invisible, like a guest in her own life. The scent of luxury didn't comfort her, it suffocated her. Her new husband led her through grand hallways lined with portraits of men who had never smiled. "You'll find your room upstairs," he said, his tone distant. "I work late, don't wait for me." It wasn't cruelty, it was indifference, and somehow that hurt more. Days turned into weeks. Breakfasts were silent affairs, porcelain cups clinking in a room too large for two people who couldn't look each other in the eye. He buried himself in meetings, surrounded by power suits and profit margins. She found solace in painting, soft strokes of color against white canvas, trying to create warmth in a world that had none. Yet even in his coldness, Aiden couldn't ignore her. She was a storm wrapped in quiet grace. The way she carried herself with dignity, even in chains, unsettled him. He had seen women chase his wealth, his name, his empire, but never someone who looked at him and saw nothing she wanted. Nothing except freedom. One evening he caught her in the garden, barefoot, standing beneath the rain that once witnessed their union. Her hair clung to her face, her eyes closed as she let the water wash over her, as if trying to erase everything that bound her to him. For a brief moment he forgot to breathe. There was something achingly pure in the way she defied her sadness, fragile yet unyielding. "Get inside," he said finally, his voice low, almost rough. She turned, droplets glistening like diamonds on her skin. "Why?" "So I can keep pretending I'm alive." He had no answer. That night he stood outside her door for a long time, listening to the faint melody of her sobs. Something stirred within him, a feeling he hadn't known he was capable of. Guilt, compassion, maybe even the first flicker of affection. But Aiden Knight didn't know how to love. He only knew how to own. So instead of opening that door, he walked away. Still, he couldn't escape her presence. He began to notice the things he used to overlook. The way her laughter softened the air when she spoke to the maids. The way she left fresh flowers in the study he rarely entered. The way she turned pain into art. He realized she wasn't weak for staying. She was strong for surviving him. And deep down, though he would never admit it, he admired her. One morning, as sunlight poured into the dining hall, Alina looked up and found him already seated. Without his phone, without his usual shield of detachment. He was simply watching her, his expression unreadable. "You don't eat much," he said quietly. She met his gaze unflinching. "It's hard to swallow when you're choking on your own choices." He almost smiled. The faintest trace of one. "You have spirit, Mrs. Knight, and you have walls," she replied. The silence that followed wasn't cold this time. It was charged. Something was shifting between them. Aiden didn't know it yet. But the woman he had married for convenience was slowly becoming the one person who would challenge every belief he'd built his empire on. And Alina, despite every vow to keep her heart untouched, could already feel the pull. that dangerous, magnetic current that ran between pain and passion. In the mansion of marble and glass, two broken souls stood at the edge of something neither could name, and neither could stop. Because even in a marriage built on power, the heart writes its own terms. And soon, the ruthless CEO would learn. The strongest contracts aren't signed on paper. They're written in surrender. The mansion stood like a kingdom of glass and stone, breathtaking, cold and hollow. Every corridor whispered with silence, every chandelier shimmered with untouchable beauty. It was a house built for power, not warmth. For Aiden Knight, it had always been his fortress. For Alina, it felt like a cage made of diamonds. Each morning began the same. She'd descend the grand staircase in soft silk robes, her bare feet silent against the marble floors. The scent of fresh coffee filled the air, yet the seat across her was always empty. Aiden would already be gone, off to conquer the world one meeting at a time, while she conquered her loneliness in the echoing halls of his empire. But that house, with all its cold perfection, began to change, not with grand gestures, but with moments small and fragile. It started one evening when Aiden returned home early, something he never did. The staff froze in surprise. He simply nodded to them and went straight to the library, where he found her, barefoot again, hair loose, standing by the window with a book in hand. The light from the fireplace danced against her face, painting her in gold. She looked peaceful, unaware of the storm brewing behind his calm eyes. He didn't speak, he simply watched. Something about the sight unsettled him, the softness, the ease, the quiet that didn't beg for approval. It wasn't submission, it was serenity. A kind of beauty that made even a ruthless man hesitate. "You read too much," he said finally, his voice low and teasing. Alina turned, startled but not intimidated. "And you work too much," she replied softly. For a brief moment, the air between them shifted, charged, fragile, dangerous. He smirked faintly and walked closer. "Books can't keep you warm." "They can," she said, her gaze steady. "When people can't." The fire crackled behind her, throwing embers into the air like tiny stars. He wanted to say something sharp, something to remind her who he was. But her words disarmed him. He had built an empire where no one dared speak to him this way. Yet she did, calmly, elegantly, without fear. That night, he lingered longer in the mansion. His office lights stayed off. Instead, he poured himself a glass of wine and found himself walking toward the terrace where she painted under the moonlight. The canvas before her was unfinished. A stormy sky over a quiet sea. Her brush moved with a tenderness that made his chest ache. "What are you painting?" he asked. "Freedom," she said without looking up. "Something I haven't seen in a while." He stood beside her, close enough to feel the warmth of her shoulder. "You have everything anyone could want," he said. She smiled sadly. "Everything except peace." Aiden looked away. He didn't understand peace. His world was built on control, on numbers, on dominance. But as he watched her that night, her delicate hands moving through color and light, he realized something unsettling. She wasn't afraid of his power. She was untouched by it. Days turned into weeks. The house that once felt silent began to breathe. She filled it with small details he never noticed before. Candles by the stairs, lavender in the study, piano notes echoing softly in the evenings. And he found himself listening. One morning, he woke earlier than usual. The scent of fresh roses drifted through the hall. Following it, he found her asleep on the couch, a half-finished painting beside her. A faint smile curved his lips, the first in years. He covered her with a blanket and quietly placed her brush back on the easel. He didn't know why he did it. Maybe because for the first time, someone's comfort mattered more than his pride. But pride dies slowly, and love grows silently. Their lives began to intertwine like sunlight through frost. She'd catch glimpses of him watching her in meetings held at home. Sometimes, their fingers brushed when passing a file or reaching for a glass. Each touch left behind a spark neither dared to name. One evening, during a dinner with investors, Aiden found his attention drifting to her. The way her laughter softened the sharp corners of the room, the way men turned to listen when she spoke. Jealousy, a feeling foreign to him, flared quietly. After the guests left, he confronted her in the hallway. "Do you always smile like that with strangers?" he asked, his voice taut. She raised an eyebrow. "Would you rather I frown through my own dinner?" His jaw tightened. "You're my wife." Her eyes gleamed, calm, dangerous. "In title, Mr. Knight, not yet in heart." The silence that followed was heavy, electric. He took a step closer, his voice low. "Careful, Alina. You don't know what you're playing with." She looked up at him, unflinching. "Maybe it's time someone reminded you. Not everything can be controlled." Her courage both enraged and enchanted him. And that night, when he tried to sleep, her words echoed in his mind like music he couldn't silence. The house that had once been made of ice now burned with an invisible fire. A tension neither of them could escape. He found himself returning home earlier, inventing excuses to see her. She found herself waiting by the window, pretending she wasn't. Two hearts, trapped under the same roof, bound by pride, drawn by desire. The house of ice and fire had begun to melt, and neither of them knew whether they were being consumed by love, or saved by it. The walls of the mansion had learned to hold secrets, echoes of footsteps, whispered sighs, and the unspoken language that existed between two hearts learning to recognize each other. What once was a place of silence had begun to hum with something gentle, almost sacred. It began subtly. Alina started noticing the smallest changes. The way her tea was already warm and waiting when she came downstairs, how the flowers in the hallway were replaced before they could wilt, or how the library's fireplace was lit before she entered on cold evenings. At first she thought it was the staff's doing, but then she saw him once, placing a single white rose in a vase beside her easel before leaving for work. He didn't say a word, he never did. But in those quiet gestures something wordless began to bloom. Aiden Knight, the man known for crushing emotions under contracts and boardroom deals, had begun to soften, not out of weakness but out of wonder. The woman he had married to silence a crisis had become his calm. One night, she couldn't sleep. The mansion, though elegant, still felt too vast, too cold. She wandered to the terrace in her silk robe, the city lights glimmering below like fallen stars. There, she found him, sitting in the dark, sleeves rolled up, the glow of his cigarette illuminating the edges of his tired face. "You don't sleep either?" she asked softly. He didn't turn right away. "Sleep doesn't visit men who have too much to lose." She stepped closer, the breeze playing with her hair. "And what have you lost, Mr. Knight?" He looked at her then, really looked. His eyes, always sharp, were tired, almost lonely. "Myself," he said finally. "Somewhere between ambition and survival." That was the first time he had ever spoken like that, not as a CEO but as a man. Without thinking, Alina sat beside him, her robe brushing his arm. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was full of everything they couldn't yet say. The wind was cool, the city pulsed below, and for once, the ruthless billionaire allowed himself to feel small beneath the same stars as everyone else. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "The marriage," he replied. She hesitated, then nodded. He looked down at his hands, strong, steady, the hands of a man who controlled empires, and yet they trembled slightly. "I regret how I made you feel," he whispered. "I regret not understanding what I had until it started to matter." Her breath caught. She wasn't expecting that. No grand apology, no speech, just a confession spoken in the dark, soft and raw. That night changed something between them. The next morning, she found a note on her vanity mirror in his bold handwriting. "For the woman who paints storms and survives them. Don't stop creating beauty, even if the world doesn't deserve it." Her fingers lingered on the paper, and for the first time she smiled, not out of politeness, but from somewhere deep within. From then on, their days began to intertwine. He started joining her for breakfast. Sometimes he'd read the newspaper in silence while she painted. Sometimes they'd exchange only a few words. But those few words carried more warmth than 100 hollow apologies. One evening, she walked into his study unannounced. He was sitting by the window, the skyline glowing behind him. Papers were scattered across the desk, but his eyes weren't on them. They were lost in the fading sunset. "You look tired," she said gently. He chuckled, low and rough. "You make exhaustion sound poetic." "Maybe it is," she said, walking closer. "Maybe it's just your heart reminding you it's still there." He looked up, his gaze meeting hers, steady, unreadable, yet burning with something unspoken. "And what if it's too late for hearts like mine?" "It never is," she whispered. Her hand brushed his cheek, hesitant, trembling, yet full of compassion. It was the first time she'd touched him willingly. He froze. The world outside ceased to exist. The noise of traffic, the ticking clock. Everything vanished under the weight of that one touch. Aiden closed his eyes. No boardroom, no contract, no power ever made him feel this vulnerable. And it terrified him. When she turned to leave, he caught her wrist gently. "Stay," he murmured. Her heart stuttered. She sat beside him. Neither spoke, but the silence said everything. The next days were different. He'd pause meetings to have lunch with her. He'd walk her to the garden instead of letting the chauffeur do it. Once, when she accidentally pricked her finger on a rose, he panicked, taking her hand with surprising tenderness, his thumb brushing over the tiny cut as if it were a wound to his own heart. "You'd think I was made of glass," she teased softly. He smiled faintly. "No, Alina, you're the only thing in this house that's real." Her laughter filled the air, light, melodic, and for him, intoxicating. And yet, behind all that tenderness was a fragile truth. Neither dared to call it love. They were two people who had found warmth in each other's shadows, but hadn't yet learned to step fully into the light. Still, the unseen softness between them grew stronger each day. It wasn't loud, it wasn't grand, it was the kind of love that crept quietly into the spaces between loneliness and longing. Aiden began to see her everywhere, in the way morning light touched his desk, in the echo of music she played in the halls, in the scent of jasmine that lingered wherever she went. He didn't know how to love her, but he knew he couldn't stop trying. And Alina, against every promise she'd made to protect her heart, was falling for the man who once made her hate the sound of her own name. Because love, she realized, doesn't always arrive with a smile. Sometimes it begins with sorrow, and grows from silence. The days that followed were a delicate illusion, soft mornings, quiet glances, and laughter that trembled like candlelight. For the first time, Alina began to believe that maybe, just maybe, their story could be rewritten, that beneath the cold armor of the ruthless CEO was a man who could love her not out of possession, but out of devotion. But love, when built on fragile ground, always comes with a test. It began the day tragedy came knocking. Her father, the very reason she had agreed to marry Aiden, fell ill again. The call came in the early morning. She could barely breathe as the doctor's words shattered the brief peace she'd found. Aiden found her in the hallway, pale and trembling, the phone slipping from her fingers. Without hesitation, he caught her. "What happened?" "My father." Her voice broke. "He's gone, Aiden." For a moment, even the walls seemed to stop breathing. He held her as she collapsed against him, his heart breaking in a way he didn't know was possible. She wept into his chest, not as his wife by name, but as a woman mourning the only man who had ever protected her. Aiden didn't speak. He didn't know how to comfort with words, but his arms spoke for him, strong, steady, refusing to let her fall. In the days that followed, the mansion dimmed. Alina's laughter disappeared, replaced by silence heavy enough to drown in. She withdrew into her art room, painting endlessly, stormy skies, broken wings, fading sunsets. Her grief poured through her colors. Aiden tried to reach her, but every time he stepped into the room, she'd turn away. "Alina," he said one night, his voice soft, almost pleading. "You're not alone." Her brush froze mid-stroke. "But I am, Aiden. I've always been." He took a hesitant step closer. "That's not true." "Then why does it feel like it?" she whispered, her eyes glistening as she turned toward him. "You don't know what it's like to lose everything and still have to smile because the world expects you to be strong." Aiden felt something tighten in his chest. He wanted to tell her he did know, that he too had buried more than people. He had buried pieces of himself for years. But pride was a cruel master. So instead, he reached for her hand. But she pulled it away. That rejection cut deeper than any boardroom betrayal. From that night onward, she began to disappear in pieces. She stopped joining him for breakfast. She spent hours walking alone by the lake outside the mansion. The warmth that once lit their home now flickered weakly, like a dying flame. And then, one evening, she told him, "I'm leaving, Aiden." The words fell like glass shattering between them. He turned, disbelief flashing in his eyes. "What?" She stood by the window, her silhouette outlined by the fading sunset. "This house is this life, it's beautiful, but it's not mine. I can't breathe here anymore." He took a slow step forward. "Is this about your father?" "It's about me," she said softly. "I've spent my whole life being someone's duty. My father's daughter, your wife, this empire's ornament. I just want to be free." He wanted to argue, to order her to stay like he once might have. But something inside him had changed. For the first time, he saw not a wife, not a contract, but a woman he couldn't own. A woman he was about to lose. "Alina," he said, his voice breaking for the first time. "Don't do this." She smiled faintly, tears shimmering in her eyes. "You taught me how to survive, Aiden, but now I need to learn how to live." And then she walked away, leaving behind the empire, the marble halls, and the man who finally realized what love truly meant. Just as it slipped through his fingers, the mansion felt colder than ever. Her laughter was gone, her scent faded from the hallways. Aiden tried to focus on work, on numbers, on the comfort of control, but everywhere he turned, she was there. In the sunlight spilling over his desk, in the quiet hum of the city below, in the empty chair across from him. One night, he entered her art room for the first time since she left. Her easel still stood there, a painting half finished, a man standing by the sea, reaching for something just out of his grasp. On the back of the canvas, she had written only 2 words, "Find yourself." He sank to the floor, his head in his hands. The man who once commanded empires now felt utterly lost in the ruins of his own heart. For days, he didn't eat, didn't sleep. His assistant found him sitting in the dark, staring at the painting as if it held all the answers he'd never asked. That was when he realized, all his power, all his success, meant nothing if the only person who made him human was gone. Aiden Knight, the man the world called ruthless, finally understood what it meant to be broken. And for the first time in his life, he didn't try to fix it. He let himself feel it. Every regret, every missed moment, every unspoken word. He had spent his life conquering cities, yet failed to hold on to the one soul that had truly seen him. In the stillness of his empire, he whispered her name. A prayer, a promise, a plea carried into the silence. "Alina, come back to me." It had been 3 months since Alina left. 3 months of silence, emptiness, and regret echoing through every marble hallway of the Knight mansion. The world still saw Aiden Knight as the untouchable CEO, composed, fierce, and unstoppable. But behind closed doors, the empire had begun to crumble, not in profits or power, but in purpose. He still came home every night, but the light stayed dim. The house that once hummed with her laughter now whispered her absence. He'd walk through the corridors, pausing outside her old studio, half expecting to hear the faint sound of a brush against canvas. But there was only silence. Her absence was everywhere. In the untouched piano keys, in the empty teacup she used to hold, in the pillow beside his where the scent of lavender had faded away. He had all the wealth in the world, but not her. Each day began with headlines and meetings, but every night ended with memories. He'd pour himself a glass of whiskey and stare at her unfinished painting. The man reaching out to the sea. And he'd whisper the words he never had the courage to say when she was still there. "I was supposed to protect you, not lose you." Meanwhile, miles away, Alina had built a quiet life. She volunteered at the same orphanage she once visited before her marriage, reading to children, painting with them, finding solace in their laughter. The simplicity healed her, one smile at a time. But at night, when the city grew silent, she would find herself missing him. The man who had once made her feel trapped, yet somehow also cherished. One evening, as she sat by the orphanage gate, watching the sunset melt into gold, a familiar sound stirred behind her, the hum of an expensive car engine, slow, hesitant. She turned. A sleek black car stopped a few feet away. The door opened, and there he was, Aiden Knight, the ruthless CEO, standing in the soft orange light, his expression stripped of power, pride, and pretense. He looked older, not in years but in sorrow. The tailored suit couldn't hide the exhaustion in his eyes. For a moment neither spoke. The world seemed to hold its breath. Finally, she broke the silence, her voice calm but trembling. "What are you doing here, Aiden?" He took a step closer. "Looking for you," he said quietly. "I've been looking for you every day since you left." Her heart skipped, but she kept her distance. "You shouldn't have." He smiled sadly. "I shouldn't have done a lot of things. But this is the only thing I can't stop myself from doing." She turned away, her fingers tightening around her shawl. "You have an empire, Aiden. You don't need me." "I don't," he said, his voice cracking. "But I want you. I've had everything, money, power, control, but none of it feels real without you in it." She blinked back tears, unwilling to let them fall. "You're saying all the things I wished you'd said when I still lived in your house." He took another step forward, his voice low and pleading. "I didn't know how to love you then. I thought love was ownership. I thought it meant protecting myself from pain. But when you walked away, I realized love isn't control. It's surrender." Her eyes softened, but her silence stayed. He hesitated, his composure breaking completely now. "Alina," he whispered, his throat tightening, "please, don't go. Not again. I'll spend my whole life trying to learn how to be the man you deserve, if you just give me one more chance." The words hung in the air, fragile, trembling, real. Alina looked at him for a long time. She saw not the cold tycoon who had once ordered her around, but a man stripped of armor, standing bare before her, offering his heart with nothing to shield it. She walked closer, slow, hesitant. The evening light fell across his face, highlighting the shimmer of tears he didn't bother to hide. "You broke me, Aiden," she said softly. "But you also taught me what it means to be seen. You taught me that love can't be forced, it must be chosen." "I'm choosing you now," he whispered. She smiled through her tears. "Then start by walking beside me, not ahead of me." He nodded, and in that single gesture everything changed. The ruthless CEO bowed, not to the world but to love. He reached for her hand, slowly, as though afraid it might vanish if he moved too fast. When their fingers intertwined, it wasn't fiery or wild, it was peaceful, certain, the kind of touch that said, "This time, I'll stay." They walked together along the narrow street beside the orphanage. No bodyguards, no cameras, no empire watching. Just two souls, raw and reborn. The city lights began to flicker awake around them, but for Aiden, the only light that mattered was the one he saw in her eyes. That night, he didn't drive her back to a mansion. He took her to a small art gallery, one he had secretly built in her honor. The walls were lined with her paintings, every single one he'd kept after she left. She turned in awe. "You kept them." "I couldn't destroy the only proof that beauty existed in my world," he said softly. In the center of the gallery stood a new canvas, blank, waiting. Aiden handed her a brush. "For our next chapter," he said. She laughed, wiping away a tear. "You always knew how to make a deal." "Not this time," he whispered. "This isn't a deal, it's a promise." As she dipped the brush into the paint, he came behind her, his arms encircling her waist, not possessive but protective. Together they painted their first stroke, imperfect, yet beautiful. In that moment, the world outside ceased to matter. The empire could rise or fall, the city could sleep or burn, but inside that small room, two broken hearts had found their home again. Their love story was never meant to be perfect. It was meant to be real, raw, redemptive, eternal. Because sometimes even the ruthless must fall to their knees to learn what it means to truly love. And sometimes, the most powerful words in the world are whispered softly, trembling through the heart. "Please don't go." In the end, she was forced to marry a ruthless CEO. But he begged, "Please, don't go," became more than a story of power and pain. It became a journey of transformation. Alina entered that marriage as a sacrifice, chained by duty and circumstance, yet walked out as the woman who taught a ruthless man how to feel again. She showed that love cannot be commanded, only earned, and that even the coldest hearts can learn to beat for someone else when touched by kindness and truth. Aiden Knight, the man the world once feared, discovered that control is not strength, vulnerability is. For all his power, he found his greatest victory not in boardrooms or empires, but in the simple act of whispering please to the woman who held his soul in her silence. Their love was never perfect, it was wounded, flawed, and human. But it was real. It was the kind of love that rises from ashes, that survives storms, that chooses to stay even when leaving seems easier. In the world's eyes, they were an impossible pair, a ruthless tycoon and a gentle dreamer. Yet together, they redefined love itself not as dominance or surrender, but as two hearts learning to meet halfway. And so, as the curtain falls on their story, we are reminded that the most beautiful love stories are not about fairy tale beginnings. They are about forgiveness, growth, and the courage to say, "Don't go, stay, and let's start again." Because sometimes the end of pride is the beginning of love. And sometimes, all it takes to heal two broken souls is one trembling whisper,